Okay, we're going to make a start back again. I hope you had some good conversations over your coffee, and I hope you got a bit of pumpkin pie. Okay, I'd like to introduce Marília Bonas Conte now, from the director of the Immigration Museum in São Paulo, and she's going to explore some questions with us around immigration and identity in this amazing, diverse and complex city. Thank you very much.
First of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me on all the Glasgow Museum stuff. And my English is definitely poor, and I got a terrible flu, a terrible cold yesterday in the air conditioner at 18 hours. So if my voice disappears in the middle of the presentation, I'll try to communicate myself in other ways. So I'll try to read a bit because of my difficulties with the English. And well, this is a picture of our collection, Immigration Museum. So I'll talk about experiences, memories, and diversity. And here the plural is very important to us. This is São Paulo, and this is important because we work in a large scale. This state is almost the size of the UK. So to think about immigration in this perspective, it's important to think about this territory. And Brazil is one of the largest countries, and we had a lot of people. So the Immigration Museum of São Paulo is located in the old building of the former hostelry of immigrants of São Paulo. It was built in the end of the 19th century to receive mostly European migrants to work in the coffee plantations. And this project, it was a political project that paid the tickets to mostly European went to work in the Brazilian coffee plantations to enlighten. So we have a ratio thing to enlighten the population of workers that was formed in that period for slaves, and after, I don't know, 2 or 3 years for ex-slaves. So the migration project, specifically in São Paulo, is really connected to our eugenic discussions and racial issues. And then in the beginning of this main project, in the end of the 19th century, only white Europeans were acceptable, mostly Italians. And then people from Japan specifically, but it was in the beginning was not that, because they were yellow, so there was a racial discussion also about the contribution, the racial contribution to the Brazilian society. And the Immigration Museum, the immigrant hostel, so the Brás hostelry, it worked from 1886 until 1976. So it's a long period, and in a way, the story of the building tells us the status of the immigrants in the Brazilian society, specifically in São Paulo. And in this period, received more than 2.5 million immigrants and migrants and local migrants from more than 70 countries and from all Brazilian regions, also indigenous people, also ex-slaves. So depending on the part of the history of the hostelry, we had a lot of different experiences. So this is the main picture and the traditional picture that when the ship, so I'll talk about this process of the great immigration in Brazil. So in the end of the 19th century, Brazil invited these Europeans to work in the coffee plantations and paid the tickets. They come by boat, by ships, and then they arrive in Santos, that is the closest port in São Paulo, and then they took a train and stayed over here in the hostelry. And usually in the first 3 decades, it was like a traditional way to document, to take a picture of all these migrants in front of the font. And then usually if you have 12 years old, you were able to work in the coffee plantations, were considered as an adult. And we have a lot of similarities with the New York experience and Buenos Aires experience also, with all the hygienic things, so to check the teeth and check women if they were pregnant or not, if they have any disease, to guarantee the quality of this workforce. So it's not very not necessarily as romanticized it looked after this. So this is a room to subscribe to these jobs in the coffee plantations, and it was the first public building in São Paulo that had warm baths, so warm showers and water. São Paulo is not that hot. So we have some images of the refectory and the dormitories. And then in the 1990s, the museum, the hostelry was closed to become a real museum, mostly connected with the more conservative perspective of the immigrant identity. So we have these immigrants that went to work in the coffee plantations. Because of the crisis in 1929, they were able to buy a part of the farmers, these coffee farmers, and they could arise, they could be like a middle class, an important middle class in the Brazilian society. And of course, when they become an important role, they start to ask for political participation. They also, how can I say, develop a very interesting perspective of their own identity as pioneers, as people that went to Brazil to construct a country that was nothing. And this racial superiority also sometimes is, it's very close to this way of construct these identities. And the museum in the 1990s was very connected, strongly connected with this kind of perspective of these immigrant identities, mostly from the beginning, the first 3 decades of the life of the hostelry, and not necessarily the part of the refugees, the local migrants, and other situations that were less romantic, or was harder to develop this kind of narrative. And then 5 years ago, the government of the state of São Paulo decided to close the museum, first of all to restore the whole building, it was a historical building, and then to think a new position to the Immigration Museum in the contemporary world. So a lot of specialists and curators were invited to discuss what would be a great immigration museum in a very diverse society as Brazil, but with a lot of prejudices and a lot of difficulties and differences and social gaps. And, well, museums are not that well recognized as important part of our society yet. So how can we contribute and discuss this in our role, with the social role, but thinking about the limits of the museum in the dialogue with the society. So we started to think about some points to the management thing in this repositioning. So first of all, the social engagement of the museum is the central topic, transparent structures of decision making. So we try to explain why we don't accept an object with no documentation, or what is a collection policy, and why we have to ask for a researcher if this is oral history, it's allowed or not to share this oral history document. So we try to present to our audience in different ways who decides what, when, with whom, inside the museum. So we try to present the museums to people that are not used with our technical structure usually. And that insertion of people connected to the experience of immigration, migration in all process linked with the preservation, research, and communication in the museums in a wide range. So, of course, this is a name. It's not that easy, and of course we still have the connection with the state and with the government. So sometimes they want to present themselves and the history of São Paulo in a less criticized, less critical perspective. But we try to engage people in our decisions in a very wide range. I'll show you in a minute what we're trying to do. And we ensure the presence of multiple voices and versions. And this is, I think this is where it's okay until now. We're guaranteeing this, and the rest is more complicated. So here we have a picture of a migrant, a local migrant. Usually they came in smaller groups. Women are the chief of the families, a lot of children, and it's very different of the Great Migration with, I don't know, 100 or 200 people from one country. And this is a Portuguese migrant, and a picture of our collection. So we begin to, I'll present this. So we decided to develop a long-term exhibition called Migrate, Experiences, Memories and Identities that tries to, how can I say, to talk about the whole process and not necessarily the memorial perspective of the former migration. So we provide an overview of the Great Migration, the immigration policies in Brazil, and we try to connect the experience, so individual experience with the whole process until nowadays. So this is the first room of the exhibition. It's an installation of Nuno Ramos, that is a very important Brazilian artist. And this is inspired in the Primo Levi's book about his experience in a concentration camp. And he talks about like a curse of the work. So everyone was in the concentration camp because they were others, they were different. And in between these different, they were very different in the concentration camp also. But they were united by the curse of the work, of the forced work. And everyone called brick in a language, so it's like the brick materialized the curse of the work in this universe that doesn't know yet how to deal with the difference. And then this kind of truck was also a truck used to the local migrants to go to São Paulo usually, and it was like a very strong, it was, I don't know how to explain this, but you can see that all the bricks are in the floor, in the ground, and there's a chair that reads an excerpt of this Primo Levi's book. So it's like provocative. The former long-term exhibit had a very comfortable identity when we're talking about identity, with a lot of sceneries and a lot of how can I say, reconstitutions. And then we started to provoke, are you the same? Do you recognize yourself in this process? What will you do if you find someone that is totally different of you, you put in a concentration camp? What is the discussion? And we have this, some part of the collection. Here's the repertory. We have like audio experiences in many languages, and in this, with the long-term exhibit and some projects, we are dealing with the history and experience of immigration and migration in the state of São Paulo, the construction of identities in the contemporary world. So this is a very strong focus, mostly in our educational programs, so to discuss the construction of identities and hyper-identities. I love the concept. I'll try to study more about this. And the cultural right of representation, discussion, construction, deconstruction, and access to the museological experiences. So we try to invite our audience to disagree if they want, and to propose another kind of interpretations of our exhibition, our collection. So we have a very strong partnership with more than 60 communities of immigrants in Brazil, mostly in São Paulo. We have Portuguese classes, we have a lot of projects with them, but I've chosen 2 and 3 to present to you. So we have this problem to how to develop a collection policy in immigration museum. Which kind of object represents the experience of immigration? So it could be, I don't know, a bag, it could be a slipper, it could be anything, a toy, but how can we select? So we have 12,000 objects, and we don't have any documentation of 70% of these objects. So we don't know why they're there. We're not able, even the specialized staff, we're not able to choose one instead of other, and we are trying to invite the communities to give us some information about what they think about this. And well, that's the main question to the Brazilian context of immigration. How to deal with plural identities, so with the new immigration and the new and contemporary immigration and refugees in different contexts. How we deal with invented traditions, so 3rd generation, 4th generation that try to reconstruct and sometimes invent some traditions that are not, definitely there's no connection with the country of origin. And how we talk about representativeness. So we have a lot of programs, and one of them is this Meeting the Collection. So we bring the communities to the main decisions about the presentations. So we invited the Lithuanian community and put all the objects that we have connected to Lithuania and asked them to talk about these objects, what they remember, what they don't remember, what feels more representative. And then it was a very strong experience, very powerful, because a lot of these people were not friends necessarily, and then they become friends because of these objects. Oh, my grandmother had this kind of pillow, and then I was like, I don't know, when I was young, I was trying to help her developing this kind of thing, or we ate like a specific bread that we do with this kind of object. So the project also reinvents the communities, an idea of community that nowadays is very complex. And we have also a very polemic one, it's the Immigrant Fest. It happens for 20 years, it's happening, and it was born in a very conservative perspective, to share the immaterial heritage, mostly from the beginning of this, the Great Migration. And now we're putting a lot of new communities and inviting a lot of even gypsies, even gypsies, I say because in Brazil they're not representative, but we try to connect people with different not necessarily origins, but connections with identities. And they have this group, these 40 communities, they have together to produce this fest. And it's like a chaos. They are always unsatisfied because there was, oh my God, I'm Italian. We have more Italians than Nigerian in Brazil. So I should have 2 spaces for my I don't know, art and craft shop, and then we mediate this conflict, but we didn't tell people how to do, but we guarantee that everybody is unsatisfied because everybody has to share space, and it's a strong success. We have 7,000 people in 2 days, and we don't have such a large space. And we also have the experience with collaborative curatorial process. We are dealing with refugees now, and not necessarily Syrians that they're coming to Brazil, but it's not a question still here in Brazil. But we have a lot of African refugees mostly, and they usually stay in a shelter, homeless shelter that is a part of the former building of the hostelry. Nowadays we have the former building of the hostelry is divided in 2. One part is the museum, the other part is the homeless shelter. And it's very symptomatic also of the status of the refugees and immigrants. And this homeless, 20% of this shelter is occupied by refugees or migrants. And then we have a long-term process with them project with collaborative curatorial. I wrote an article to CAMOC News about this, so we can talk about this later. And we also have the oral history program that try to balance the former experience of the first immigrants to Brazil and how immigrants are dealing with the political issues in Brazil nowadays. We don't have still a law about immigration. So our last law is from the 70s, where we were in a dictatorial process. So every foreigner is considered like a non-desirable person in Brazil. So how can we deal in this perspective, the formal and the social perspective, and how can we share this in our oral history program? So this is the Immigrant Fest. So this is the most complicated part to decide who is going to present where. And these are some educational programs. So we have, this is an interesting program where people from the community share their own recipes. So we have a lot of selfies. And then we're trying to stop the metaphor of the stained glass, and we're trying to present this kind of metaphor. So every story is important, and every story in a huge perspective form another story. So it's different from this. That you can, this part doesn't have a meaning if it's separate, but this has a meaning. So this is what we're trying to do. So sorry for my English, but my French is great.